Okay, so today we're going to look at factorial analyses, more complex research designs. We'll talk through an example and then talk a little bit more about some of the kinds of different levels that were talked about in the Hackman article. Okay, so there are some really good reasons to keep things simple. One of the ways, good reasons for keeping things simple is because this will simply show just direct effects. If the independent variable has an effect on the dependent variable, you can see that really easily. These are easy to analyze and interpret. They're very straightforward. These are all good things. On the other hand, if you're interested in really bang for your buck and trying to figure out all of the potential research relationships that are going on in any given context, looking at multiple different predictors, a simple experiment's just really not going to do that for you, because in making it simple and narrowing things down to the potential influences, you've kind of controlled out and gotten rid of all of the other potential kind of effects and how things might work together to predict things. In eliminating some of the messiness, you've also eliminated some of the applicability, but also the potential theoretical value. Okay. So, if we were interested in the question, do couples who spend more time together stay together longer? Is this a way of predicting longevity in a romantic relationship? Um, we only have one independent variable here. This would be uh, how much quality time folks spend together. And uh, the DV would be how long they stay together, so longevity of the relationship. So if we only have one, and there's any kind of a curvilinear effect here, maybe folks who spend no quality time together don't stay together long, but people who spend tons and tons also don't. Maybe there's something in there. Maybe there's other factors that relate. There's lots of other things that people have looked at to predict whether relationships, particularly romantic relationships, are going to be successful and long term or not. So, looking at quality time and all those other variables and how they relate to each other, if we're only looking at one independent variable, amount of quality time spent, then we're missing all of those other things. So a factorial design is a design with one or more independent variable. We call these independent variables in this case factors. The simplest factorial design would be a 2 by 2. So this is two independent variables. Each independent variable has two levels, or two kind of different conditions. So if we're looking at longevity of a couple, and we want to look at how much quality time they spend together, but also something about their personality. So maybe quality time spent together is more important for some personality types than for other personality types. Maybe, maybe not. This is a hypothetical. But so we could look at this with four experimental conditions. So we'd be saying introverts with really frequent quality time, or introverts with not a lot of quality time, extroverts with a lot of really frequent quality time, extroverts with not a lot of quality time. And we would need to look at introverts, extroverts. This is not an independent variable that we can influence, right? So we'd have to have at least different amounts of folks or different participants in each of those categories. If we're going to look at differences across how much quality time, we'd have to assess, okay, so if we give folks lots of quality time and then limit the quality time, is the fact that they had more quality time before going to influence what that infrequent quality time, the impact of that on the longitude or the length of their relationship? So there's some order effects you got to think about there, right? Um, In this case, I think it would make sense to treat the frequent or infrequent quality time as also an independent variable that you wouldn't have a lot to of influence on. So just picking a bunch of folks that did have a lot of frequent quality time and a bunch of folks that didn't have frequent quality time and comparing those. In which case we've got 4 conditions, right? So that's a lot of participants that we need to recruit. One of the downsides of factorial designs, if you're, is that you're looking between participants. So we have different participants in each one of these conditions. We're not repeating the examination or the measure for all of them. Needs a lot of participants. So our N is going to be huge. This is a limiting factor for factorial designs. Again, if we were to look at the frequency of quality time in 3 different levels, some infrequent and frequent, that makes 6 experimental conditions. Again, depending on how we treat the frequency experimental condition, we are going to need a whole lot of people to do this study. Okay, so there's a couple different ways we interpret factorial designs, and some of this is really great because it gives us insight into some of the relationships going on that we wouldn't have if it were a simple study. So a simple design, you get main effects. These are the effects, right? For a factorial design, you have main effects. So of the independent variable across different conditions, right? The sum amount of how important quality time is on longevity of a relationship. The sum amount of whether introverts or extroverts stay together longer, right? But then you'd also have interaction effects. So maybe it is the case that for introverts, that quality time is much more important and much more predictive than it is for extroverts. Might be the case, right? It might be the case that for really low quality time, nobody does well. But once we have really high quality time, it depends on a person's personality characteristics, how long they're going to stay with their partner. So those are both examples of interaction effects that might work with this hypothetical study. We also, as I said in this, in the lead up to this and describing this hypothetical, some of our factors we can manipulate and some of them we can't. So personality of our participants can't manipulate that. That one's set. People are introverts or extroverts. We would have to select for that from a larger group of or a larger sample. When we talk about variables that we can't manipulate in that way, we often talk about them as participant variables. So PV here. Okay. So again, looking at that 2x2 design, a main effect, again, would be that frequent interactions, folks tend to stay together longer. So years happily married increases for if you are spending more frequent quality time. On the other hand, an interaction would be seen here. If you notice, these 2 blue lines are different in slope, right? One is more steep than the other. So a difference in slope of these lines would suggest that there is a way that the frequency of quality time, so how much quality time you spend with your partner, is more important, right? There's a more steep slope. It's more important for extroverts than it is for introverts. This, again, is hypothetical. So the main effect is the overall effect of one variable. So you could see that in those slides, those graphs. The interaction is where the effect of one variable depends on the effect of another variable. So it may be not present in the absence of another variable. So if this only happens for extroverts and not for introverts, that would be an interaction effect. And it also is an interaction effect if there's a difference, like we just saw, in slope. So it looks different, better, worse, stronger, different direction for given a different factor. Okay. So our with our main effect here, again, we're saying that relationships are more successful when couples have more quality time together. This is what a main effect in this hypothetical study would suggest. A main effect for frequency of quality time. Um, the interaction here would say that there's a greater increase in longevity of relationship for one personality type than another. So that means there's an interaction between frequency of quality time and personality in predicting how long folks stay in their marriage. Okay. So for some of you, you may be thinking, oh, this sounds like the talk we had earlier in the semester about mediator and moderator variables. That is exactly correct. So a moderator variable in this case would be a variable that influences the relationship between two other variables. In that last example, the personality type is a moderator for the relationship between quality time and longevity of the relationship. So if you are spending more quality time with your partner, you're generally going to stay married by this hypothetical longer. On the other hand, that quality time matters more if you are an extrovert than if you are an introvert. So that's an example of a moderation. So here, a moderation, again, is a moderator for quality time. Okay, so how do you decide whether to use a factorial design? Well, um, more conditions mean more participants. We just talked about that a little bit. If you're going to do a between subjects design, so you're not looking at giving multiple kind of conditions to the same person, to the same participant, that means a lot more participants, especially depending on how many factors you're looking at, how many different levels you're looking at. Um, there's depending on how you do this with stats, if you're using repeated measures, right, that would be a between participants design. You may have a greater potential for statistical error, right? You can also do a regression here. This is regression is a common way that people would handle factorial designs. That's a little bit less problematic in terms of error, um, but than repeated measures. But you also have to think about, so if I give them an assessment of how happily married they are, and this week when they hung out a whole bunch, and then I give them another one next week when they hung out less, are they going to be remembering what they wrote last week and therefore have some order effects, or be biased in terms of trying to either sound different, or be consistent with their former ratings, whatever, right? So you have to think about how that test retest is affecting them if you choose to use between subjects. If you don't use between subjects, you just need a lot of subjects. Okay, so the bottom line, is it worth it? Well, it depends on whether you're interested in those interactions. If those interactions are something that you could theoretically, using the theory in the area, using what we know thus far about the phenomena, if there's something that makes sense, if there's something that you could use, then yeah, factorial designs are the way to go. Otherwise, it may not be worth it. A lot more participants, a lot more conditions. If we don't know how to use the answers to our questions, maybe it's worth it not to put in the effort to know and just do a simple study. That's all I've got for this video. Stay tuned for the next one where we'll talk about um, the content, kind of moving across different levels, context and analytical levels.